Was there ever any difficulties from the military, from the government, upon gaining access to the troops, to everything, or did they ever want to try to control the footage that you were releasing out?
No, we were never censored or never even really overseen by anybody. There's an embed system. You know, you fill out the forms, and they put you with a frontline unit, and the economic realities of reporting are such that most reporters can't spend more than a week or two on an embed. And I think the military kind of counts on that, maybe even unconsciously, but counts on that to limit the amount of exposure that the press has, not exposure, but how close the press will get to soldiers. I mean, obviously, the longer you spend with anybody, the more open they become, and the more is revealed. And so I think they didn't really count on Tim and myself to spend, you know, to do 10 trips with 30 guys. And so we shot our footage, and we have, as you saw in the movie, there's footage of Afghan civilian casualties, of American casualties, of American soldiers, at one point kind of losing it in their grief. There are firefights where they're not even in uniform. They're in shorts and a t-shirt, on a heavy machine gun without even helmet or anything. Like completely irregular. They're not ill-disciplined, but they certainly were irregular up there. And all kinds of things that I'm sure would make some people in the military uncomfortable. But no one ever asked to see our footage. They certainly, I mean, there was just no intervention at all.
I'd like to take some questions from the audience. Do we have one?
I did what I did because in the scheme of this whole painting the picture of that ambush, that was just my brushstroke. It's not above and beyond. That picture wouldn't have been complete without that brushstroke, and it was my brushstroke to take. I didn't take the biggest brushstroke, and it wasn't the most important brushstroke. It was just one that completed the picture. This is the nation's highest honor.
Have any of the soldiers that were portrayed seen the film, and what has their reaction been to it, if so?
So the question is have the soldiers seen the film, and what's their reaction? Yeah, we actually, the soldiers, we wanted to, when we got to the final cut, before we color corrected or sound, basically did the color correction, final touches on the post-production, we invited the soldiers from the platoon and their wives and girlfriends down to New York, and we showed them the film. We wanted them to be the first people to see it. And they really liked it. I think they liked it because I think it reflected their experience, and it was true to their experience. It didn't gloss over anything. It showed it for what it was, and they liked that. And more importantly, in certain ways, was that the wives really liked it and the girlfriends liked it for other reasons. That it allowed them to see through a keyhole into this world of combat that they normally are not allowed into. And we realized that the wives and girlfriends are fighting their own battles back at home, just trying to keep their marriages together. Their husbands come back and they're changed, and they can't, and they won't express why to them, And so their relationships are obviously very difficult. And here we were, the film suddenly was acting as a kind of catalyst that allowed them suddenly a basis for a discussion, and that was really amazing. It was a really amazing thing to see.
I hit the bottom right of the building.
Were you guys both shooting? And were you in military? You have protective uniforms, helmets, all that. Did you look like soldiers? Did you have what kind of cameras? I'm just amazed at the footage you got.
We both shot all the video. Minus maybe a minute or 90 seconds worth of at the very beginning and the very end. There's a couple of shots that soldiers took before the deployment. That scene on the train obviously was shot by one of those guys. But I had a Sony V1 and Tim carried a Sony Z1 camera, and sometimes we were there together, and so there were scenes where we could shoot with two cameras. Sometimes I was taking notes. You have to be working for a recognized publication or TV network to be embedded. You can't just wander in there saying, I want to make a documentary. So our passage in there was courtesy of Vanity Fair. We were working for Vanity Fair as embedded journalists, but we were also making a documentary. And so we were there as reporters, and we had to carry everything that we shot the movie with, everything we made the movie with, we had to carry on our backs. Restrepo was a 2-hour walk up that hill, and we didn't have a crew, we didn't have lights, we didn't have, I mean, we used microphones that were, you know, we used camera microphones, you know, attached to the camera. It was very, very primitive, in some ways, very primitive filmmaking. Sometimes if Tim was shooting stills, you know, I would take over with the camera. Sometimes I was taking notes, he would take over. And sometimes we were there by ourselves. And then obviously that guy had to do everything.
Yeah, one question back there, yeah.
How was the cow issue settled?
In the end, the cow issue was settled. The US paid for it. Yeah.
Are you going to go back to the civilian world?
I have no idea.
I still obviously haven't figured out how to deal with it inside.
Was there ever a time where they told you to turn the cameras off, or you told yourself to turn the cameras off?
Was there ever a time when they told us to switch the cameras off, or we decided to switch the cameras off? There was only one scene where I decided to switch the camera off very temporarily, and it was during Rock Avalanche, and I was with the guys when they were running to counter to take the hill again, and we didn't know what was up there. You know, there's a moment where the camera stops because I was running up, and then I was like, whoa, wait a second, what am I doing? And then I was like, well, we're doing this anyway, so I should go. And so we got up there, but that's when we found that Rugal had been killed, and Rayon, one of the guy has blood on his back, just really flipped out because the eventually there were some local Afghan soldiers with them that came up, and they started to drag Rugal off by the legs, and Rayon just flipped out and was just like, you can't drag him away from the field like this. So I'm not having my friend dragged away by his legs. And I was filming, and you're in a complete state of shock in those things. I mean, we'd already been in a lot of heavy fighting, and suddenly that's going on, and and Rayon said to me, it was like at one point he was like, shut the camera off, shut the fucking camera off. And I kind of did for a second, and then, half a minute, I don't know time, but 30 seconds later I just carried on working, because was like a protection mechanism for me in some ways. That I was protecting the camera kind of protects you from the reality of what you're seeing. Later on you digest it, you're like, what was I doing up there? And but interesting enough, so I carried on, and later on, there's that scene where Rayon is smoking a cigarette and he's just lost his friend. It's like out of a narrative film. There's a rare moment where his friend's just been killed, and he's going through in his head. Nobody could have saved him. And he turned to me and he said, "Look, I'm really sorry I shouted at you back there. Like we understand why you're here, why you're filming, and we want you here." And I said, "Listen, I'm just in default as well." And that was the only moment.